Coelti, welcome to the show without a name, I was saying to you when the internet was working.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we get to talk a bit about all things PKM, being an artist, poetry, but let's not get ahead of us and start from the beginning of it.
Yeah.
How are you today?
I am fantastic. The weather is finally great in Chicago, and I recently got a bicycle again, which has been awesome. I've needed to be on a bike, so it feels good to be moving in the summertime.
Sun and bicycle sounds like the real dream.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I would love to introduce you and tell everyone what I know about you. But if you want to correct or add anything, please feel free to. Yeah.
I actually love hearing other people's introductions of me because it's much more distilled than me talking about me. So please, what do you know about me? Tell me.
So, Coelti, you're an artist. Yeah, you're a poet and you write poetry on a typewriter. And you have a business with a friend of you, and you both write on your typewriters poetry. Yes, which is the coolest thing, if I must say so myself. So I definitely want to know more about that. And we've known each other through Building a Second Brain, where we're both mentors, and you are a mentor for the first time during this cohort, the cohort 14th of this online course, Building a Second Brain. I repeat it so in case people don't know what it is and want to Google it. Yeah. And you ride a bicycle.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And I guess you're also a facilitator in artist things, right?
Yeah. I've definitely had a lot of titles, but I'm really leaning into facilitator, especially because I learned facilitator, right, is like, has the root word facil, right, to make easy. Like, so I'm really interested in like, oh, how do I make things easier for people? And how do I make extremely hard things easier for people? So yeah, when I talk about being an artist, I often tell people like, yeah, I'm an artist like as a profession and a vocation, but it also feels more like an orientation. Like I see the world through artistry, I see the world through art and poetry. And if it's an identity, it's because it's an outlook as much as anything. So to kind of jump topics back, I not only got a new bike, but I figured out how I can bring I got panniers to put my typewriter in, and then figured out how to put my street performance gear on my bike. So this is going to be a summer of biking and typing and making poetry for people on the spot, which I'm pretty excited about.
That sounds amazing. I wish I could be in Chicago just to follow you and see what you're getting to in the summer.
Yeah, we'll see. I have this idea of putting myself out on social media and using the handle bikes and types because it rhymes. But I'm not super strong on social media. I'm not actually that great at showing up on the internet yet. So we'll see. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah, we'll follow you in that journey for sure.
Yeah.
That's so great. I love the facilitation and making things easy for people. I am really gonna take notes on that when we finish. Yeah. I love that.
Well, I'd like to connect it to poetry too, because what I found about being a street poet or a typewriter poet, or someone just who does commissions, right? So typically what my business partners and I do is we go out with our typewriters and we sit down with a sign that says poems. And then people will come and give us a word or an idea or someone they want us to write a poem to. And then we'll use our typewriters to write a poem on the spot and give it to them. And so what I have found as a spontaneous poet is that what I'm actually making easier for people is this expression of something they really want to express, but don't trust themselves to, or don't know how to, or wouldn't express it in poetry. So I feel like a creative facilitator of their feelings and experiences too. And it's very special to be able to offer someone your expression of what they want to express. It's a very intimate thing, actually.
That's awesome. It sounds very magical and intimate somehow.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I want to come back for sure to poetry and being an artist and all of that. But first, I want to maybe start directly with personal knowledge management, and then go from there. And I was wondering, how did you find this world, and what did you think it was missing for you in the sense of like managing knowledge, because you've done that for your whole life, I guess, without having a system. And yeah, I'm wondering, like, what, when you came to this online community of personal knowledge management in general, like when you found it, what did you think of, like, oh, what is this? Like, I'm wondering the first contact to it and how it felt, and yeah, interested on that.
Yeah. Let's see, I'm trying to find a beginning, because I know certain chapters, but let's see if I can find a beginning. So I've always been a big reader. I love books. And I found myself in like late 2019, early 2020, being like, you know, I used to read more. Like I used to read more, and now I spend a bunch of time on the internet. So this is funny. So I tried to like hack my brain and hack my algorithms, right? And I was like, if I'm spending too much time on the internet, but I know I want to read, what if I started using YouTube search on like books and reading, and like really trying to change my algorithms away from like the lectures I had been watching into like, okay, let's reprogram my brain to remember that I love books, right? And that, I started retraining my YouTube algorithm, and I found out about like, I guess there's a part of YouTube that identifies as booktube. They're like, oh, we're all about books, right? And at some point, Ali Abdaal's content started getting pushed in my direction. He was like having this meteoric rise on YouTube, and also reads books. And so YouTube's like, you like books? This guy reads, you'll like this guy, And so I remember being stunned by the idea that book notes could be content. Like, you know what I mean? Like I had not put two and two together and thought like, actually someone's distillation of a book could be content. And then you could make a video about distilling the book. I was like, really? I was beside myself. And he talked a lot about this book, Show Your Work, which is a book by Austin Kleon, which is a book that's been very influential in my life, even if I haven't shown up on the internet and like, let people into my world. So there were a few of his videos where I just felt a lot of resonance. And he had made a video about building a second brain. I don't remember the exact timeline, but I remember he had made a video about building a second brain. And I was like, well, what's building a second brain? Because I had started to hang out in parts of the internet where people talked about the concept of a second brain, but I've heard people describe their phone as a second brain. So I thought it was just kind of like a euphemism that people were using. After watching that video, I then learned about the Building a Second Brain cohort and community. And I was like, well, this is very interesting. And I think I remember this would have been early 2021, because I had considered doing Ali's part-time YouTube Academy. Because I was like, I'm jumping all over the place, which is why I said it's kind of tricky to find a beginning. I am an artist, but I've never fully figured out how to be a content creator, partially because some of the things I enjoy talking about and some of the things I make art about are not just like, uncomfortable. They're like really controversial in ways that I see people online talking about. That's kind of my own content bubble. I don't mean to be mysterious. I just know I have some pretty significant fears I'm still working with in terms of like putting myself out on the internet. I had some terrible experiences when I was a teenager in terms of like some of the bad actors I encountered on the internet. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit away from myself. But I remember pushing myself to apply for a scholarship for the Part-Time YouTube Academy, because I was like, if I'm ever going to become location independent, if I'm ever going to become someone who could work from anywhere as a creative, I need to come into a different relationship with content creation, with being an entrepreneur online. And so I was very caught up in like, ooh, it could be through YouTube, even though I've never done YouTube before, right? So I applied for a scholarship for this program for the Part-Time YouTube Academy. I don't get it. It's all fine and good. And then shortly thereafter, I learned about building a second brain. And at the time, and this was a calendar year ago, this would have been like April, May of 2021. I really wasn't sure whether or not like I'm the kind of person this was for, right? Because I believed in the concept and the language. I was like, I already am a creative. I already have this like outlook. I just don't really do it digitally. I'm a little scared of the internet, you know what I mean? So I was like, maybe I am the kind of person this would be for, and maybe this will be the thing that helps me move from this fascinating life I've built for myself into sharing about it, you know? And now, especially on the other end of mentoring, I understand that my position is a pretty common one. There's a lot of people, just so many people who are looking to build the bridge between their lives as they're living it and expressing themselves online. Sometimes, and a lot of times that is for economic reasons or change your life kind of reasons, even if your life is good, even if, you know, you want to go through this transformative process. But my income was not one that could be like, oh yeah, it'll be easy to purchase this. At the time, the cost of the course was like the cost of rent for a month for me. So I was like, I don't know if I can do this. But I remember reading that there was a scholarship option available. And so I got in touch. I think I got in touch with Will Mannon prior to the scholarship being released and being like, by the way, I'm really interested in that. And then put together a scholarship application that I was super proud of. Like the whole process of the scholarship application, I was super proud of. And then when I got it, I felt incredible. I felt incredible, you know, and I felt really proud of the effort I had put in. And so I joined Building a Second Brain. I was so excited because there were a few other things I was doing at the time, including being in this earth-based leadership cohort with a woman named Shayna Gladstone. Her whole philosophy on how to have an earth-rooted business and not have this big separation between yourself as a participant in regenerative living and yourself as an entrepreneur, to have this be this big gap. So I was like, all right, great. I'm going to go through Building a Second Brain. I'm going to go through Earth Rooted Leadership Academy. I'm going to have this offering and it's going to be fantastic. But then I found out during last year's cohort that I needed to move. So that would have been move number 19 for me in 10 years. So when I went through Building a Second Brain, I was also like going through a bunch of trauma, of uprooting my housing situation again. And so So a few different things converged, right? I had all these plans about what my life could look like and how I could like use this program to help support that, while a bunch of things in my life are rearranging their foundations. And I also have this earth-rooted leadership cohort that is encouraging certain kinds of growth and feeling like I'm limited in my showing up for that. Like I'm learning how to facilitate, but I'm not figuring out how to be of service and how to build this offering. So I've just been talking at you for like 10 minutes, but that's kind of like, yeah, you know, so in some ways, building a second brain was an anchor for me because it was like this through line. It was this like 5-week course of like me transforming how I think about work and how I think about creating and how I think about showing up online. And I figured out it was like much more emotional than cerebral, like pretty early on. And they don't trick you with that, but it is one of those things where especially having gone through it a few times now, I understand that, like, you know, when we talk about productivity, people really do want, when people talk about wanting to be more productive, what they want is more agency and autonomy and energy for their lives. And as someone whose life was falling apart again, like I wanted so much to believe that like my projects would carry me through and these areas would resemble each other in 3 to 6 months. And that was only so much the case. So when I came into personal knowledge management, I grew a lot, but I wondered so much if it was for people with stable jobs, stable careers, stable housing, you know, and not for people like me whose life cycles very rapidly into new stages all of the time, even though everyone's life does that. You know what I mean?
Surprise.
So, so I left cohort 12. The other thing that was really special about that is cohort 12, Tiago was still kind of using these science fiction identifiers as what I think in retrospect, I don't know if that was marketing or just kind of the framework he was working through, but I had been super big into The Expanse. And so he had talked about The Expanse was like a through line metaphor for cohort 12. So I'm still like, yes, I'm a belter. I identify with this, right? So I had if I hadn't watched The Expanse, I don't know if I would have been as drawn in, but that really did spark some resonance in the way I was thinking about it. So I came into personal knowledge management to summarize, wanted to read more books, hacked my YouTube algorithm, found out about Ali Abdaal, found out you could make book notes as content, and kind of got into the personal knowledge management world through the productivity porn world, because I feel like so many people turned to productivity content over the pandemic because of they were very much desiring a sense of agency and autonomy. And I count myself among them. So found out about building a second brain. It changed my life, but also my life changed. And left with the goal of being a mentor, partially because like, I was like, how does this apply to people like me? People who are self-educated, maybe not credentialed, people who are already identify as creative, but are ambivalent about being content creators. Like, I think the driving question for me the entire time was, does this apply to me? How does this apply to me? And I, especially looking back at this past cohort 14 and being a mentor, I recognized a lot of the value that I was able to provide was because a lot of people come into that question. They see these high achieving, very visible, like productive people and want to emulate that for themselves. But there's a lot of doubt about whether or not they can, or they'll have the resources or the circumstances. And so I'm really into like understanding the transformation of personal knowledge management. But I definitely am on the emphasize the person side, like emphasize how personal it is to manage what you understand, and don't discount your own inner knowing for the sake of affirming external knowledge. And I definitely just talked to you for like 20 minutes straight, so excuse me.
I loved it. I was really enjoying it, the deep listening, really. Thank you. I'm actually doing a masterclass on listening by Motoki, also a student from Building a Second Brain. So hi, if you're watching this. He's teaching the frameworks of Nancy Klein, Time to Think, and the masterclass is called Listening. And I'm like, I'm better at this now that I've done this work, and it's amazing. But I have a lot of things, a lot of follow-ups from what you said. And
understandably.
I can totally relate to answer to your monologue with a little bit of a monologue too, but a short because I want to listen to it. Yeah. I totally see what you were like when you arrived at these communities, like, do I belong here? At that question I asked myself, and I have to say you were much braver than I was, because my first cohort, number 8, I was silent and camera off because I said, like, they were mostly men and a lot of people from tech, and I was like, I'm not this person. I am a foreigner, I am a translator, I am from the creative world. I didn't thought I could say something, and it was like, this productivity world is not for me. But I knew I needed the concepts, like, to move forward with what was coming for me, which was expression, and also online, not only offline. So exactly what you said. But for you in the path, and for you to just like be vocal the first time already and say, like, I need to like see if I belong here. When you were like, I think faster than me, which is not a bad or good thing, but and what I want to say is, like, you've been so efficient in a beautiful way to translate this concept to your world. And I've seen that in your mentoring now, when you're like, okay, para is a mirror. And when you said that, like, that's so, like, such a beautiful analogy and way to put it. And I'm like, how have you done that in a year? Like, how have you translated Building a Second Brain concepts, personal knowledge management concepts, like para, code, and all of the mindsets and mind shifts that are around that? Because you say it's not cerebral, is very emotional, and I can totally relate. It's a lot of mind shifts and like behavior, which is, it's way more deep that all of the para and code could be, right?
Can I interrupt real quick? Because I do want to give credit where credit is due. Para as a mirror is something I got from Carrie.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, but also it was a metaphor that made the most amount of sense. And I'll say this too. One of the things that happened in my cohort 12 is I was kind of going to mentor sessions based on my availability more so than my resonance with mentors. And I didn't make it till Carrie's session until week 3. So I come into her session, I think during Distill, and I'm like, she's different, like in a way that like I needed to see. I needed to see someone who had what I'll call radical yet sensible positions. I needed to see someone who is like, actually, this is the area I come in from. This is what I use it. You know, I use it in this revolutionary way, in a way that like I definitely enjoyed and got a lot out of a lot of the mentor sessions I went to. But I was a little upset with myself for showing up week 3 to Carrie's. I was like, I should have definitely checked out what she had to say way earlier. And so like, I don't mean, I speak with such reverence for Carrie and for Rin, because I think there were a lot of ways in which I felt much more empowered to be honest and brave about my truth, because I feel like Carrie really did bring a person forward, personal knowledge, like bring the person to PKM. So not just to interrupt you to fangirl over Carrie real quick, but I was just like, I just, she said para as a mirror. And I was like, that's true, like so much. And so this is what I just think is so exciting about the community, is like, we have now developed co-resonance in a way that like expands everybody. But some of applying the concepts to me to then mentor from them was because I was like, you're all getting this in a bunch of different language. Let's build the bridge between what this is and what this might look like for someone like me, which is what you're going to be doing. So you look at yourself in the mirror. Anyway, I interrupted.
It's
to
great.
Give credit.
It's great. I loved the fangirling moment, and we're all there fangirling over Carrie and you, to be honest. Yeah. And it was great. I didn't have much to say apart from that, but now that you said resonance, I think that's one thing that you have really brought, like perspective, but from the resonance way of seeing things. And I think that's been a common thread, like a thread through your sessions, like resonance. And I was wondering what you want to talk more about resonance. You've mentioned it here already a couple of times, but if you could like go a bit more deeper on resonance, that would be nice.
I can, and I will, and I'll say this, right? So a lot of folks in Building a Second Brain, already know that I after the cohort in the spring of 2021, in the summer, I applied for a position at Forte Labs. I applied for the course director position. And that was highly unusual for me because I'm not credentialed. I don't really I've never worked an office job or a startup job or a productivity job. It was really kind of a stretch goal because I was like, oh, you're looking for non-traditional applicants. That's me. I'll try it. But I wound up growing through the process of like seeing what it felt like to try on this role before I even got it. I was amazed that I got an interview. And so I actually had this interview with Tiago Forte. And it was incredible. This was the only interview I've ever done like that in my entire life. And there were a lot of ways in which I have felt similar to Tiago. Like I was like, I actually feel a lot of resonance with you as a person, although I don't know if that's just because I don't fully know why. Is it because the way you express yourself? Is it like the way you think about things? So at the end of the interview, he said something about like, you're a lot like me in that way. And I was like, thank you for saying that, because it makes me just feel parasocially creepy to be like, we're alike, but I bring that up because and especially having like been in this community and witnessed him up, a little bit more up close through mentorship, is like, he really does believe not just in like being productive for productivity's sake or being an entrepreneur for entrepreneur, like he really believes in the healing process of all of this. And I heard him speak to that a lot this cohort. Like I don't know if he self-identifies as a healer, right? But what we have in common is a faith in healing through these processes. I feel as though when we talk about resonance, resonance is a sensation. It's a sensation that we can try to put metaphors around, try to put art around, but it's pretty mysterious. It's a little bit beyond our brains, beyond our capacity for verbalizing. And it actually lives in our bodies. But how do you bring the body into a Zoom room? How do you bring the body into a community that's global? And how do you have an honest body when so many of us carry trauma that we have not had the opportunity to metabolize, right? When we talk about people wanting to use personal knowledge management or productivity to get agency and autonomy and influence over their lives, that's often in response to the traumas of capitalism. And this is not the place to discuss whether or not capitalism is good or capitalism is bad, but we need to discuss the fact that it is traumatizing to the human animal body to suspend what your actual inclinations are so that you can go make a living, you know? And when things like food and shelter are outside of your reach because you don't have the capital for them, not because shelter and food isn't all over the place, right? You really have to honor that the path to an honest body, the path to true resonance, the path towards where you want your attention to go has a lot of damage, has a lot of wounding, has a lot of trauma. And so building a second brain isn't like marketed as a healing course, but these are practices that bring people into a sense of, oh, I can come up towards this wound and live with it. I can come up towards this pain and live with it. And that is true even in Tiago's story, because Tiago started taking notes to manage his pain. It's a literal thing. His body carries all of this physical pain and ache, and he was looking to free his energy up to have a different quality of life. Like, and he doesn't overemphasize it, but I think it's a good thing that he mentions it, because the details are different, but a lot of us have very similar stories, you know? And especially in the past few weeks, I've just been honest, both with the mentors, the staff, and with my students, like, actually, I'm struggling to get out of bed, you know? And I don't want to keep pretending like that's not a thing that a lot of us go through. I don't really want to keep pretending like we aren't all carrying a lot of wounds. And I'm not going to oversimplify the immense pain of the pandemic in a single sentence. But I will say that in my more optimistic days, I feel like there is more language that we have around having shared trauma because of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, I can say, I know that your past 2 years were extremely difficult. And previously, I might have pretended that wasn't true for me and for you. And so when I think about resonance, I feel as though resonance is about how do we come to our senses, not just come to our senses mentally, but come to like our actual bodies and live in them and find safety and find tools and practices that allow for the metabolizing of our pain, that allow for us to be honest about pleasure and honest about like what makes us feel good, not what we think will make us feel good or what we think we should do in order to be told we are good, but what is actually honest about how we experience life. And some of where I'm at with that, this book is not within reach. But there's a book called Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown. Is this a book you've encountered?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like that is required reading. I feel like everyone can get something out of that. And it was inspiring to me to read Tiago's book notes on pleasure activism. Like, oh, you've actually read this book. You've encountered this book. But one of the other things that I want to bring up, because it's been a portal for me to be practicing this honest body, honest resonance stuff, and this is within reach, is that I am in a burlesque program. On the surface, it's a burlesque program, but it's called Pussy Magic.
Awesome.
And I'm a little embarrassed to be like, we're putting this on recording, but when my friend Gia, right? So I say the name Gia all the time, which is why I've accidentally called you Gia a bunch of times. It's like,
don't worry, Gia, doesn't matter.
Gia, yeah. But my friend Gia lady, this is someone I've known for over a decade now. And I have watched her become this burlesque star. And I won't get into all of the history of our relationship here because it's 10 years and I'll monologue for another half an hour. But there was a break in our relationship a few years ago when we both went through major breakups. She was going through a divorce. I went through an extremely painful breakup process with someone I deeply loved. And we had kind of fallen out of friendship and out of connection. But I started coming back into healing through meeting people who were influenced by her, by going through her programs, by going through the first iteration of Pussy Magic. And it was a heart-to-heart conversation I had with her in December that made me decide to commit to 7 months of this, right? And you look at this workbook is her expression of a bunch of notes and a bunch of life lessons and a bunch of yes, this is about burlesque, but it's not just about taking your clothes off and adding glitter. It's about what does it take? What does it take to engage the sacred feminine? What does it take to be able to say the word pussy without being embarrassed or shrinking or acting as if it's provocative rather than just like an aspect of feminine magic, right? And as a non-binary person, like I was raised as a woman, I was raised in a very feminized way, but I was resistant. I was like, if I claim pussy magic, then they're just going to call me a woman and it's going to be bad. So I had to go through these gates, these thresholds of resistance. And so, January, February, even March, I'm going through this deepening of my sensual honesty. And then I'm coming into building a second brain being like, I can't say the word pussy here. You know what I mean? I even have a quote from my friend. She cracked up. She's like, because I said to her, I was like, I can't show my pussy in my brain. And she was like, that's a great sentence. And I was like, I know, but it's also very frustrating because so much of who I am and how I am has come through doing the shadow work in that friendship, has come through teaching some of her own students about shame and pain and consent. And even in the program, people look up to me because I'm so willing to express things that we don't generally talk about as a society. And sometimes I do that at great risk to myself, which is one of the reasons I don't necessarily show up online to the degree that I want to, because I find it very easy to talk about these sorts of things, in general. But when it comes to expressing it online, I will tell you, Gia, this is one of those full circle moments, right? at one point in one of Ali's mentor sessions, he was doing like a group think. He had asked people about autonomy and what gives them a sense of autonomy. And I didn't know he was going to read every comment in the Zoom chat box, but I was like, I made a comment. I was like, it'd be really interesting to talk to sex workers about their sense of work and autonomy, LOL. And he was like, oh, that would be really interesting. Send me an email. And I did, and I didn't hear back, but I was like, oh shit. Because like, I know a lot of burlesque performers. I know a lot of sex workers. I know a lot of sex working artists, people who are like, actually, I will do this kind of work because it pays so well. It frees up all this time and energy to do art that I actually care about. And I want to have that conversation with people who have never thought about that kind of thing. In fact, I think I even like, when Maven was first starting up, I like made an application being like, I would teach a cohort-based course on what knowledge workers can learn from sex workers. And I also didn't hear back, right? So like you talk about bravery, sometimes I'm just reckless. Sometimes I'm just like, no, actually, this is an aspect of life that we don't look at. We don't look at what sex is to people. We don't look at what work is to people. We have all these assumptions about what these things are. And then when we don't talk about them, societal shadow emerges, because we are saying, this is what we don't look at. This is what we don't talk about. And then you have all of these ills and pains of society because these things don't get talked about. They don't get aired. They don't get expressed. And so when I think about personal knowledge management, I think about, how do we heal society through expression and through the courage it takes to say, these are real things people go through. There are people who don't want to be working in adult industries. There are people who are trafficked into those sorts of things, but they're not the same people as the people who said, actually, getting paid to participate in sex as I've designed it has changed how I look at society. And so through Pussy Magic, through talking about my experiences in the adult industry, and through like, I don't want to have to pretend like they're not real. And now I feel like I've gone off the deep end and you might not be able to post this recording.
I am really, really in awe and very, very grateful that you can just like talk and express yourself. And that's beautiful. And I'm grateful for, as I said, you're brave, but it takes more than that. I feel like it is the way you've gone to share all of this, because it's not like, I feel it like this, like threshold there, like you move forward and then move in your chair, and it's also physical, kind of, you can tell. But then there's also the other side, that someone has given you permission, like your friend from Pussy Magic, and also Tiago, in the sense you say, like, we are like in some ways, or Carrie, these persons you have that have like examples that have given you permission. So it's the way you've gone, and then the path that you have gotten permission, and they meet, and that's the real deal. So what you've done and what they've done, and you meet, and then you can from there go. So it's like this magical thing that you've never, like, no one would ever think like a personal knowledge management online course would give you permission to do stuff. Like you think you're gonna get your files organized,
right?
but then one day you find yourself like, oh, what happened for me is like, oh, I can't express myself, I can write, I can teach people, I can say what I think and feel, and it's allowed. I am allowed. Like that's what's about, I think.
It is, and I'll reference a note because what would a conversation about PKM be without a personal knowledge, without a note share?
Of course.
But so one of Gia's early things, right? Like one of the first notes is this like official permission slip, right? Because like right, this is what she wrote, right? I, Gia Lady, grant full and irrevocable permission to Coelti on this day, January 17th, 2022, to live authentically and artfully as your whole self at every moment. You have full permission to personally dispel judgments of self that incur doubt or shame and live unapologetically free. You have full permission to take up space and be your fullest, brightest self imaginable, to let your voice be heard and your art be seen. You have full permission to feel and enjoy this world around you and never to feel shameful of your sensual and erotic self. Permission is granted forever. No one can take this permission away, even should the slip be destroyed or lost. The holder of this permission slip may grant similar permission to anyone else they encounter. Wow. You know? So like it is about permission. And we had talked about this in some of the mentor check-ins, is especially early on, people need to be given that permission. And we didn't say it in all these ways, but because of all of our distinct relationships with authority, like as children, there is an authority aspect, right? And going real deep in the weeds on attachment theory and like how children develop and things like that. But at the end of the day, so many of us have a damaged relationship with the permission we allow ourselves, you know, and that happens very early. So like I've been in a bit of a conflict, and I know that my body really, really struggled with how do I honestly express myself without harming my relationships and building a second brain, which is why, you know, after the cameras were off at the mentor, training, I was like, hey, Stephen, can we talk about a thing real quick? You know, because like, and I'm not going to flesh out this whole conversation for your listeners, but I will say Bob's comment made me so happy, because like the notion of like, you know, yeah, but we're providing a premium product. And Bob was like, so is Coelti. I was like, I adore you. That is the right comment. That is absolute, because not only do we need permission, we need solidarity. Like we need solidarity. And in fact, like solidarity can mean you and I make different choices, but we're both still human in them, you know? And so that's the permission I've given myself to talk about my experiences, is years of healing and seeing a bigger mission. Like there are many, many people with much more at stake than I have. Like I don't have family to lose. I don't have much more to lose, quite frankly.
Your bike,
you know, my bike, right? Exactly. Well, yeah, someone stole my bike, which is why, but you know what? You know who purchased my new bike? My submissive. You know, like I'm someone with whom I have a professional, personal relationship bought my bike. And like, and so sometimes I describe myself as an extremely elaborate emotional support animal, because my living expenses are paid because I am giving my emotional intelligence to someone who doesn't have as much. That's legitimate. That's a legitimate service. People imagine this notion of like prostitutes or sex workers as people who are like lowest common denominator in society, because we're not looking at what needs people are actually seeking to get met through sex. And more often than not, it's connection. Like, and don't get me wrong, that's an oversimplified statement in the thick of like why people come to professionals for these sorts of things, or why people subjugate people sexually. That's a warped notion of like what power ought to be used for. And now I'm getting into deep philosophical weeds, but these are the kinds of things I want to talk about. And that's why I like struggled a little bit as a building a second brain representative, because I was like, look, you want to talk expression? Come to Coelti's Courage Cafe and we can talk about, you know, like what, because my choices are either deny a whole bunch of my life and its lessons, or invite people to the fire that I am constantly stoking. And that's where I see the sensibility in building my own containers online and otherwise, especially because I have so many people who I might not ever get to meet in the flesh, but who I would love to meet in a Zoom campfire on a regular basis. But I also am aware that not like there's so much there. It's not just, ooh, what will they think of me? It's, ooh, I'm basically inviting people to develop ammunition to use against me. Great. And actually nobody can give me an assurance that I will be safe. The only thing I can do is show up, express myself, and express myself in a way that the resonant people will find me. They'll say, I can handle the heat of that conversation. I can handle the intensity of grief and sorrow. And I can be in solidarity with that because I have my own grief and sorrow. And sometimes it means I can't get out of bed because my nervous system is so overwhelmed by the trauma. So that's like, to me, that's personal knowledge management. That's looking at the person, our experiences and our emotions as valid, as something that like we can co-process and lighten our load and be in solidarity about, you know. And I'm not, you know, I think I'm very much more open about this with you here in this non-official channel where I'm like not exactly a representative, but I haven't fully figured out because I was like, okay, great. So I'm actually hosting, like I'm emceeing a conversation in an online community called the Stoa with Gia Lady about pussy magic on Tuesday, right? So it's like literally in a few days, right?
Yeah.
And the typewriter tarts, my typewriter business, came through a failed attempt to bring, that's a whole story, but there's this organization called the Poetry Brothel. And the Poetry Brothel is an immersive literary cabaret that instead of selling sex, they sell poetry. So they have all their poets design a poetry whore character to do private readings in this immersive literary cabaret, which is very, very cool. I think they even have a chapter in Barcelona, but the trouble is I worked with some of the people who put on the Poetry Brothel, and we have pretty different ideas about how to be in solidarity with people who can't take off the construct or the character of being a whore at the end of the day. And I put myself through a lot to try and revitalize the Chicago chapter, only to be disparaged and disregarded. So when I made a joke with my friends about being the typewriter tarts, I was making a joke about being a poetry whore, right? I was making a total joke about it. And then my best friend is like, that's great. And rather than being casual street performers, they really wanted to they really wanted to build a business out of it and got us a grant and like filed the LLC. And so I was like, well, if I had set out to make a typewriter poetry business, I might not have picked this title. But since that's what we're working with, let's just be the loud character typewriter poets who are expressive on behalf of people who are not yet giving themselves permission to be expressive in that way.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it seems to me like you're also doing a good job, or like on the way of accepting that you contain multitudes. Yes. That is just like this you and this you and this you and this you, and they are all the same person.
Yeah.
But it's hard. Yeah. It's hard. Like I can see I'm also an activist. I'm fighting for animal rights, like now for almost 10 years. And it's also hard to bring that part of myself, this political part of myself, to my personal and professional world sometimes. Even personal, like family and stuff, they won't understand. They're like, nerd, freak, what's that? No, we're eating meat. It's like, yeah, it's hard. It's I see that, like, and your topics are next level. It's not about nutrition or just animals. It's about people, and it's like what you said. It's like this safe, unsafe conundrum, and it's I see it's not easy, but thank you for being there and for, yeah, as I said, trying to navigate all of that you are in all of the worlds and not wanting to hide, because I see it's like, why would you, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, and thank you for saying that, because it is about these ideals at some level. You know, I'm pretty stubborn in being like, well, we should talk about this. But my current trajectory is recognizing I can't force that conversation, especially on, right? Like, I can't hold the knowledge that we were all traumatized and then be like, well, let's deal with this very traumatizing subject, you know.
I see that.
But I'm very passionate about it. And so my path forward, I think, is going to be through somatic consent education, because I'm not necessarily, and never really intended to be. I was someone who in my early 20s got into the adult industry as a means to buy myself a bunch of time to do creative things. And I was never fully able to build equity because of all of the moves that I did, you know. At the same time, persistently surviving has brought a very distinct perspective to my life and a very distinct kind of empathy to people who have even more barriers than I have. Like, especially in, you know, the US is a supremely racist country, and a deeply sexist country. I mean, the whole world has its contentions with sexism, but there's a lot of ways in which like, I do feel a responsibility to leverage my perspective and experiences on behalf of people who have more to lose and people who can't take as many risks. Even if like, but I'm not necessarily trying, like, I didn't set out in my early 20s to have a career in the adult industry. I know some people who have and people who've done so, but I'm trying to figure out for me what's next. But I don't really want to pretend like my 20s weren't deeply informed by looking at cultural shadows up close. And so when I come into facilitation, when I come into teaching, I really want to teach shame breakthroughs. I really want to help people break through their shame. I really want to help people like understand what it feels like to be in integrity with their body. And I want that for myself as much as I want it for other people. So I was really moved by Tiago's framing of expression as healing, because what it took for me to get to the point that I can articulate this as something that like just ought to be talked about was years of healing. And my healing path forward is saying, I'm not at the 101 level of like helping people to understand, like, this is a thing that people go through. This is a thing that people contend with. You can Google, you can YouTube, you can find a lot of people who've articulated this as a human rights issue and a transcendence issue at some level.
Yeah. I want to go, but you can.
The final thought I'll say on that is just, but I need to be compassionate and patient with people's journey towards their own liberation. And so I want to tool myself with that. So let's go back, because I'm definitely on a soapbox right now.
I love it. Oh, amazing. This is how it should be. This is how I imagine it. So amazing. So it's perfect.
Like, I'll bet you have things to say about things. I'm like, I do actually have things to say.
Wait a moment. Yeah. But I what you said about it taking time, I see that 100 times, like with everything. We just like want the quick fix and we want it done, but it just takes time. And I won't accept it. I'm too impatient. But I'm now at a place when it's like, oh, I can see the journey and I can translate that to other journeys that I need to arrive at. And I'm much more patient, and I have this curiosity instead of this impatience. Like I said, let's see where this takes me, and not like, why not now? So it's way more what you say, compassive and like helpful in some way, like friendly, like kind. So yeah, but I want to go to poetry.
Yes. Yes, that.
Poetry, because we actually are gonna do a sprint on poetry together.
Yes.
Which is so exciting. And I consider myself a pupil. Like you have to teach me so much about poetry. I'm just like what
is your relationship to poetry?
So I've written poems since I am very young. I would say in my adolescence, I started, like when I was 12, 13, 14, I started writing poetry. And just whatever. It's, I don't know even how, it just had to happen, you know, when you have to like really get it out. And it happened to come through poetry somehow. And I remember when I went in school, and our teacher, our literature teacher, would bring poems to read. I was always excited. Like my hands will sweat, and I could feel this resonance with poetry, this connection. And my classmates were like, I cannot say anything about this. I don't know how to interpret. And I was writing pages and pages about the poems that we were reading from Lorca and from these amazing Spanish poets. And like, I remember my teacher would read my commentary aloud, and I was like, yes, this is where I thrive. This is my place to be. And then the other stuff was quite mediocre. So I could really tell that was something that really I could be with and be in a good place. Yeah. And then now that I'm 32, and when I was 28, I also went through a pretty bad breakup. I put like, to go through that, I needed poetry. And I've seen reading and writing poetry. And I've seen that when hard times come in my life, I always go to poetry. It's like the place that I run to. And now that I'm in a very good place, I'm wondering, how would it be to go to poetry also when I'm feeling great, and not only when I'm feeling very bad or when I'm in a bad place. And I want to explore that, because I haven't ever done it. I've only written poetry when it needed to be written, when it was like coming through me, like, and needed to go through the pen to the paper and out of me. And yeah, I'm in that place with poetry, trying to be not neutral about it. That's not the word, like joyful, trying to be a joyful poet. Yeah, that's where I'm at with poetry. And there's something that you said that stayed with me, and I said it's gonna stay with me forever, and I mean it. You said you don't have solutions, you only have practices. And I wonder if that's also a poetry. I think you can apply to poetry, I guess it is. And if you want to expand more on that, on that sentence you said on one mentor session, that's gonna be there, like in this space where I'm at. And with me, and connected to poetry or not, like wherever you want to go. And if you want to tell your poetry story, please too.
Yeah. So I'm especially interested in what you said about joyful poetry, because the word pleasure came to mind too, right? Like, can I write a poem from a pleasurable place? You know, I heard a person named Daje. I'm also in a writing program called the Bardo. Wow. And the Bardo is about that kind of liminal place of like really accepting and looking at writing through like understanding it as kind of mystical and in a liminal place of like we don't actually really know what happens when something comes through us and we write about it, right? Like we have so many practices to like clear the channel and get it out, but we can't call it linear, right? I think a lot of building a second brain, especially because Tiago writes so much, is in fact about how do you navigate all of the barriers between you and expressing yourself. And I will, I'm going to island hop around like I tend to do, but I'll say this, right? One of the reasons I set out at the end of cohort 12 with the goal of being a mentor. That didn't open up for cohort 13 because there was other hiring happening, but I didn't really have my sights set on it for the 14th, but I did have my sights set on rite of passage. I was like, is rite of passage, I love the notion of rite of passage. I love the intensity of it. It's even more expensive than building a second brain. You know what I mean? I was like, but I really didn't know if the things I wanted to write about, namely my experiences in the adult industry and how that relates to my present life as a poet, because it does. I will bridge that momentarily. I was like, I don't know if this is the community to write about this in, but I didn't know for sure. So I had a one-on-one. Can we talk about rite of passage? And he's like, what do you want to know? I was like, so here's the kind of stuff I want to write about. Can rite of passage support that? And he was deeply in integrity of like, I'm not saying it's not worth writing about. I'm saying this might not be the program to do it because it's so, have you gone through rite of passage? Have you done any of it? No. It's very community oriented and very like peer stuff. And so Will was like, I can't actually guarantee that you will be matched in a pod with people who can metabolize this. And I don't know that like, you know, I'm not saying it's not worth writing about. I'm saying I don't know if this is the program. And so I was like, thank you. I understand, etc. And then less than a week later, there's a popular show on HBO. It's actually won a number of Emmy Awards. It's called Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. And they literally 6 days after this conversation with Will Mannon, this Emmy Award winning show published an episode on sex work. And I was like, well, some people can have the conversation apparently, you know what I mean? Like,
HBO did it.
HBO did it. So, you know, and again, there's context, right? But some of that, and then like 4 days later, the applications for mentorship opened up for building a second brain. So some of it was spite. Some of it was like, you know what? I belong among the intellectuals. Gosh darn it. But I also had decided, okay, fine. If that's not the container, I'm going to go hang out with the witchy queer folks and write with them. And so last night in the Bardo, one of our guest facilitators was a person named Daje, who is a facilitator at a thing called the Brave School, which is about helping people express, like helping artists and wild souls, like kind of build that gap into how do you be entrepreneurs? How do you give yourself breathing room so you can still create? And Daje talked about a definition of poetry that is like that which needs to be expressed, yet can't be expressed, yet needs to be expressed. And my experience as a people's poet, as someone who goes out with a typewriter and says, yes, I will write a poem for you, is that magic work of pulling that which can't be expressed into words to illuminate that which can't be expressed. And the American poet Audre Lorde talks about poetry as illumination and talks about using that to put words to things so we can think about them, you know?
I love that.
So like this, and this is the notion of duende, right? Like it's like In Search of Duende is like, it's mysterious, but it's there. So if we name it, can we be in relationship to it, even though it will always be mysterious? Well, we need to, because we can't help it, because all of us in relationship with duende, with this spirit, all of us in relationship with it and in relationship with each other know it's there, but no, we can't access it unless we strive to access, so it's that very same concept. And I think so often people come to poetry in times of pain because that's when their body, heart, mind especially is in that can't express it but need to express it kind of space. And we so often turn to poetry as medicine rather than as a celebratory aspect, because when we're feeling good, we're not so in the intensity of it. But if you've ever been falling in love with someone or falling in love with an idea, you know that there's that like heightened vulnerability, and you want to put language to this new thing. You want to like use language to, I'm going to use the word illuminate again, to illuminate what's happening, to think new thoughts and feel new feelings. And so the pleasures of poetry can be like, ooh, how do I get in touch with a happy duende? How do I get in touch with the pleasures of life, with the erotic nature of life? How do I come to move the notion of eros out of this pornographic idea? And Audre Lorde talks about this in her amazing essay, The Uses of the Erotic, which is like not just using our feelings as like Kleenex with other people, not just using each other like, she talks about, I'm going to misquote it. No, I'm not. About pornography being sensation without feeling. And the erotic is sensation and feeling. And so poetry is a vehicle, is a portal, is a place to pull sensations from elsewhere into an actual feeling in the body, a feeling in the heart, a feeling in, like, you can't really explain why a poem makes you feel something like that. So to me, poems are the ultimate erotic vehicle to live in and we live in a very logos oriented world, right? It's why people come in for the productivity and note keeping, but leave with this, oh my gosh, I have feelings about this kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
What a journey was this? Like, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah, exactly. But we live in a world that has very overemphasized the logos, the material, the mental, and set aside the information, the honesty, the sensations of the body, of like, if you, and this would be impossible because Zoom is our medium of connection, but if you and I were in a room, like dancing, like saying we're not speaking, but dancing and letting our animal bodies feel each other, that's going to be a different sensation than this verbal stuff. And neither is better or worse. But we do live in a society, in a world that says, well, this is how you connect with people, and this is stuff you do in select areas with select people.
Yeah. And coming back to what you said from the pandemic, not being able to go dancing. Imagine, or some people not being able to go to football shows. That was their place of expressing themselves in these other ways that were not logos. And like not having that, what you said about the trauma, is really, we have been underestimated, I think, a lot of that. Yeah.
So for when it comes to writing poetry from a pleasurable place, or a place that doesn't seem as physically activating or overwhelming as grief, as pain, I think it's about like, what would happen if you honored your happiness and joy? Like, what's the metaphor for your pleasure? What's the metaphor for your happiness?
Oh, that's so beautiful.
And that pushes against the stereotype of poets being like, oh, I just have so many feelings. Yeah, you have feelings, and we shouldn't be discounting your feelings. People pay myself and my business partners to like feel on their behalf, or give them, talk about permission, give them permission to feel something. Because sometimes people come to us with heavy stuff, and they say, I have lost this person and I feel lost because of it, or I was assaulted and I'm not sure how to contend with it. You know, sometimes it's please write a poem for my dog or for my mom. And that's not less beautiful. You know, sometimes it's write a poem about my favorite word, which happens to be squishy, or, you know, or whatever, right? But what you do in that moment when you say, I am willing to be creatively brave on your behalf, they're not going to stand around for an hour while you pick the best metaphor. I often, and I think I said this in my mentorship application, is writing poetry on a typewriter for people is code on hyperdrive, right? I capture their word. I capture what they aren't saying with what they are. I organize it through a metaphor, sometimes two, but usually one. I organize what they said, distill it into a poem, which is also the expression. But then what we do, the typewriter tarts do, is we also perform it aloud as spoken word. So we actually give voice to it. It's not just like, here's your artifact, have a nice day. Some typewriter poets do that and let people have that private experience with the poem, and that is also valid. But what we choose to do is we say, here's what we created out of your prompt. Here's what we created. We captured your sensation, we organized it, we distilled it, we expressed it in 20 minutes, you know, because, and people are transformed by that because most of us think that a creative endeavor has to be this massive undertaking, and some creative endeavors are, but sometimes the most pure thing you can do is put yourself under that time pressure and say, come back in 10 to 15 minutes and we will have expressed your feelings on your behalf.
And also the medium, like you said, typewriter, you cannot delete.
Right, exactly.
You can't, the time and the device. So, oh, that's really, really cool. And I was thinking, for example, now if I compare myself to other people, I think I can feel awe very easily. I'm like, oh, look, a bird. I'm like, it's beautiful. I have all of these words for this tiny thing sometimes. Or like this color, like the color that the light brings, or whatever. Like because my dad is an artist, he's a painter. I think I can, like, it comes from him. He was always looking at colors and light. Like, look at this light, bring these colors, and I've been looking at that all my life through his eyes and his directions, right? So, and I think it's a character thing that we are enthusiasts about whatever. yeah it's a character trait. So sometimes I think like you are giving all of the things that you can feel through poetry, but because it's one of them, for example, a lot of people that cannot understand, it's like they laugh at me. I'm like, look at that bird, and I like this, like super excited, like they're like, stop it, okay, this is too much. and but people sometimes cannot really feel through their personality or whatever, or because they're going through something, you never know, right? So you are that car, like that vehicle for them to feel all of the stuff that you can feel, which is like being an artist and being brave and putting yourself out there is such a broad and magical thing, and also personal, right? It's your perspective, so it's unique in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, I feel as though people are often paying for the vicarious courage as much as they are the expression. Like they're like, oh, you're going to typewrite this? Well, what people will be like, well, what if it's a bad poem? And we're just like, well, bad poems cost the same. Do you want me to write you a bad poem? You know what I mean? Like, because, you know, and actually Gia, my friend who's leading Pussy Magic, I've been teaching her how to have more creative bravery through typewriting. She actually got a typewriter for the, you know, and we've been doing private lessons where I'm like, all right, when I teach people creative bravery through typewriters, they're like, well, what if I make a mistake? I'm like, it's not about making a mistake. What you're adjusting is not the word. You're adjusting how you feel about what you put on paper. Because, you know, you can put a new piece of paper in there, or you can say, well, the poem's going this way now. You know, that's my background in improv is, yes, I thought it was going this way, and now it's going this way. And I don't love every poem I write, but it's not actually about that. It's about continuing to be prolific and willing to accept what I wrote as good or good enough, it's, and then like watching people feel something like in front of you, like watching people be honestly provoked and be like, wow, you got that out of what I said.
Wow.
Yeah, I did. You contain depth. You contain multitudes. I'm an artist because I'm willing to look at that when you may have barriers to looking at that.
Oh my God.
But I think that what you said about awe makes a lot of sense, is because so many of us, like especially as children, we're just in awe of everything. Everything is amazing. And then we go through our growth processes and we are asked to give up our imagination. We are asked to give up our awe. And I think that's a cultural trauma too. I think a lot of us give it up so much earlier than we want to. And we seek out people who give us that permission to feel things, to have imagination, to have awe.
That's really it, like to be what you are. And when you said childish, it's like seen as childish. I see that, and I think that's why I do it less in Germany, where I live, because here it's not crying and being crying in public and being really in awe or something like, or enthusiast or like a bit louder. It's not that it's not allowed. Of course it is allowed, but it's not as accepted. So I find myself adapting my personality, and then when I remember how it is, what I really want to express, it's like, oh, it feels so good.
Yes.
Just let it, like, oh, this is a very beautiful color. And I just want to say it and be very, very enthusiastic about it. So yeah. But what I want to say about what you said, like writing poetry in your typewriter is code, like really accelerated. That's so awesome, because then you are confronted with that like imperfection very often. And that's such a good training. It's not that we have to train ourselves, but kind of we do with this mindset and stuff. Yeah. So I a lot of the students that I train on PKM, I'm doing that also in Spanish, which is super cool, because like there's not much on it. And in my mentor sessions, also in Building a Second Brain, a lot of people, they don't know that they are allowed to express themselves in whichever way they decide to, or they did not even thinking about it. Like, but what, how, what? Is that a thing I can do? And it's not only writing a blog post or a book or these things that we have in mind that are expressive. And I was wondering, what would you say to those people who are like thinking they are not allowed to express themselves? And what would be like, not advice, but like some words that you have like for the bravery of the creation process? And I know you have a lot. So bring it.
This was something that Rin had said in their Express mentor session. And I don't want to misquote them, but I think the phrasing they used was like, expression is, like, creativity is our natural state. Like, expression is our natural state. A lot of us are conditioned to the idea that we have to earn expression or earn creativity. A lot of it is about allowing it and trying different practices, right? When I say I don't have solutions, I only have practices. I have so, this is someone's practice. This other book that was very influential to me, Pronoia, is the Antidote for Paranoia. It's a thick book full of notes, it's someone's practices. There is Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, which I'm sure you've encountered. She's got essays and practices, right? Yeah, mine's like over there in another stack too.
Here somewhere. Like, where is it? But yeah.
Yeah. But so, and then to kind of use that often quoted Rumi poem, right? Like, your job is not to seek for love. It is to seek and remove the barriers you have built to love. And I think that's true of creativity too. I think our natural state is expression, our natural state is creativity, our natural state is play and awe and exploration. And so when we talk about expression as healing, what we're actually doing is coming into new relationship with the barriers we've put. We don't always get to remove them, but we can come into a new relationship. We can come in to say, oh, what I thought was a 10-foot wall is a 2-foot wall. I can step over it. Or, oh, look, turns out I can build a door through this wall. Or, oh, look, this wall is made of moss rather than stone, right? So when I talk about in typewriter poetry, it's like what you're changing is not what's on the page. You're changing to your relationship to accepting what's on the page. And a lot of us need a lot of healing and gentleness to the part of us that will over police or discipline. Like we're broadly as a species unwilling to make mistakes. You know, like kids are, like adults especially. I'm being kind of, you know, do you think birds spend a lot of time ruminating on their past choices? You know, what about like rhinos or dogs or sea lions?
I see it on my cats, on the cats that live with me. They're not my
cats. Right. I see you think those cats are spending a lot of time thinking about how their behavior is inappropriate? Probably not. You know, that's a human puzzle, right? So our puzzle is, how do we develop gentleness and compassion with ourselves? How do we come into a relationship with making mistakes or errors that still allows us emotional freedom? You know,
that's beautiful. And Coelti, what you said at the beginning, coming as you say, full circle and also closing now, because I will talk to you forever.
Yes.
You started talking also about the creator economy and being a content creator at the beginning when you like found Ali Abdal and all of this. And you're talking now about like finding that kind place to be kind, like to be kind to yourself and create and be able to create. But at the same time, when I see the creator economy world, it's like I don't want to, like that's not what I signed up for about being creative. And how do you navigate that? Like that it has to come out of you. Like you have understood, like you have to express yourself. How do you navigate that in this creator economy world where sometimes it's like so tinted from this like how do I put it, like a place you don't want to be, a place you don't want to be part of, but like, you know, you have to play in that game. And how do you do it on your own terms? Or have you found answers on that, like on that question?
They are starting to develop after this cohort, honestly, in the past like 2 weeks or so. Because of political stuff happening in the US, because of extreme threats to rights and rights for women, rights for people who reproduce, all, you know, like rights for queer and trans people. Like, part of me is like, look, I can't not talk to you about pussy magic, because if we don't keep fostering this alternate world, if we don't keep our imagination alive, we don't get it. You know, Carrie talks all the time about like freedom is not guaranteed, and people who are, you know, people who are persecuted, marginalized, you know, threatened by things that are like, know this intimately, know that freedom is never a given. So my body has quite a few things to say, like mostly, oh my gosh, this feels very overwhelming. And yet I've been really into this notion of expression as healing. And I've been really amazed by like the students in Building a Second Brain and the people in the community who say I'm important to them and important to their understanding of personal knowledge management. Because I don't know if Tiago self-identifies as a healer, but I do. And I want to improve on my capacity for healing. So I think my antidote to my reservations around the creator economy is this question about like, would it be enough to make a difference in one person's life? Because I already do that, right? People talk about permissionless leverage or scale, like, oh, I want to affect more people. Sometimes they talk about it in terms of more freedom for themselves. Mm-hmm. But I think if I imagine it in terms of more freedom for more people and more healing for more people, I've got to have faith in that. I've got to believe that's bigger than my personal pain, personal concerns, even personal risk. I'm not going to be on this planet forever. But when I go, will I be comfortable with the efforts I made towards healing what hurts in this world? And I'm working on it, you know, I really am. Like, I actually had said this in my last mentor session, which I still need to post on Circle.
Yeah, please post.
Yeah, that's, I'm like already do, like, what am I doing? And I actually think saying it aloud helped illuminate for me that I still have healing to do there. But when I was a teenager, I had revenge porn of me shared twice. And like, in retrospect, I'm so sad for the child I was who went through that. And I think it still shows up in ways that I choose not to show up online because I'm afraid. I'm still deeply afraid. And people have all sorts of reasons to be afraid, imaginary and otherwise. And sometimes I get a little frustrated with frankly, straight men who are like, it's just about showing up. I'm like, okay, you know, like, it's not, you know, but at the same time, in some ways it is. Like, Rin showing up, Carrie showing up, myself showing up. And I don't mean to like put us in an other category, right? But just like women showing up in the PKM space instead of being like, is this only for tech bros? You know what I mean? Like, it does have a ripple effect. And you can be important to who someone becomes, even if you never know it. And I think that is, for me, the medicine. And the idea that, like, I don't actually need or want 1 million followers. I don't even want to, do I even want 100 true fans? You know what I mean? Like, I was satisfied that 22 people showed up to my last mentor session, even though I've failed to give them a preview. Like, at some level, like, when I think about creation with a capital C, it's not about me. It's about like me getting out of the way of expressing in the avenues I choose towards something bigger. And the brass tacks of it, I'll say this much. I would like to be some kind of internet entrepreneur so that I don't have to continue to live in just one place on the planet. The planet is enormous and I want to see more of it. I would like to see the south of Spain. I would like to go to Germany. I would like to go to New Zealand, you know? And so that's a way in which I've started being like, well, I can show up. And when I do, like, can I have faith that I am safe? Can I have faith that my expression is worth it? And if it made a difference in just one person's life, would it have been worth it? And I think the answer to that is yes.
That's really, really beautiful. Thank you so much, Coelti, for this.
I know we've gone so over time, so thank you for your patience.
No, I don't want to add a word. What you said about getting out the way, that's like, I resonate with that so much. And I also, it's hard. We want to be about us all the time, right? Like, and it's hard to say, no, it's not about me. I'm going to get out of the way. So thank you for that. I love it. And thank you for the whole conversation. This felt like it's not a warm cup of tea. I will say like a fizzy, sweet drink.
You know what I really like is ginger lemonade.
Yeah. Like also with fresh stuff on it. And it's summer as well. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. Thank you for asking and letting me open up so much to you and monologue in my way. Thank you for listening to this conversation with Coelti. You've made it to the end. We had a fantastic time, and I am very grateful to Coelti for their time. And I will leave all the links in the description. And I hope to see you very soon in my PKM conversations with very interesting people. Bye-bye.